points, interesting data points. These are just some overall trends that we felt were worth talking about. The first question that we pulled was, on average, how often do you leave campus for the entire weekend? You can see starting there with the red and the orange a little bit hard to see, but in the top left, that's 6.47. That's every weekend, and then working counterclockwise to become less frequently. So the orange, that 6.47 is every weekend, 25.81 is 2 to 3 times a month, 18.43 once a month, 24% 3 to 4 times a semester, 20% 1 to 2 times a semester, and 5% never. I checked the last time we answered this question, which was the fall floor survey in 2017, and these numbers are almost identical. And so there hasn't really been a shift here. But we thought this was interesting, that about a third of students are going home more frequently than at least once a month. So we're going to kind of talk about this and show this piece. I don't know if there's any thoughts people have.
I was encouraged when I saw the data. I thought it'd be higher. I mean, you talk to people and it's that social norming piece, nothing's happening, or, everyone goes home, and it's just really not the case.
But still, 25% of them are going 2 to 3 times a month. That's a lot. It's a quarter of our residents, Like, that's a population we should target, if we could get them down to even once a month seems more okay, like acceptable. When I'm thinking about what would be a good amount of time for them to go home and still be engaged here, I feel like once a month would be, or less would be a goal. Now, how do we impact that? It's up for debate, but.
And I think it's worth noting, because I don't disagree, I think it's encouraging given what we sometimes hear about how many students are leaving and the perception of that. What I think is interesting is that over the last 2 years, the more we've even placed that emphasis on that late night programming series, still hasn't changed that number. And so we've added all of these late night campus-wide things, which have been impactful for sure, but haven't convinced people to still stay here on the weekend. And that, I think, is an interesting, gets into that whole why people are leaving, because people are still telling us in the open-ended comments that they're leaving because there's nothing to do, and we still get that open-ended feedback, but the data doesn't really line up with that. So it's interesting.
Well, and looking at the opposite way, 70% of the students are here during the weekends. Leave once a month, which I think is reasonable, thinking in the fall semester it's Thanksgiving, it's birthdays. We're talking about freshmen and sophomore that are more likely to go home than upperclassmen. So saying 69 or 70% of students stay on the weekends is, I think, a really good number.
And just one administrative note that I was thinking about this morning. I think we should update this, because once a month and 3 to 4 times a semester are about the same. And so perhaps taking a look at that. But anyway. The second one we had, I feel connected to the community on my floor. Red being strongly agree, purple agree, blue disagree, green strongly disagree, and yellow is not applicable. So the 2.3% who don't think this question is applicable was interesting. I think overall we do a good job at community development, as we'll talk about this afternoon, especially compared to peer institutions. But we still do have this, 38.5% that disagree or strongly disagree in terms of being connected to that floor community. And so again, I was kind of surprised by that number. That seemed really high to me, that almost 4 in 10 students don't feel connected to their floor. And it's going to contrast this afternoon with some really interesting findings that we have from Sky Factor. So,
well, it's interesting to know, what do they deem connected? Like, when you say connected, what does that mean? So that, and we don't know. But, so I don't know if there's a way that we could give them what we're deeming connected, whatever that means in some way, because I don't know how they would answer that.
Do you know if the answer to this is connected to the other one that says, I know the people on my floor? I think we have a question similar.
Yeah. The number here is a little bit higher. There's a couple questions that are a little bit lower, and we didn't include them here. I recognize the people in my community. People do feel like that's something that's happening. And one of the things that I was talking about with my staff as I was kind of looking through this is that people may feel connected to the community may not feel connected to the community on the floor, but when asked, like, do you enjoy the feeling of your building, they say yes. And so I don't know if that's they feel connected to the building but not to the floor. I don't know if that's they feel connected or they don't feel connected to the floor, but they don't want to be connected to the floor. And so I think looking at how we ask this moving forward and reshaping what we want to get from this, I think could be interesting. But it was just interesting seeing the number of things that we've put on and how well our programming is compared to other institutions, to see the number of students who still don't feel connected on the floor community.
By chance, did you break this down by building?
We looked at, no, not this one. I didn't want to break it down by building just because I didn't want to start nuancing that.
I was interested to see if you said 4 and 10.
About, yeah, it's like 38%.
If that was consistent with every building, or if it was a upper class thing.
I did
or
ask,
if it was a West Campus
I
thing.
did look at class rank at least.
Okay.
So we pulled that in our data
Yeah.
team meeting, exactly the same. Because I was like, what? This has got to be Kirkland's fault, or East Lake's fault, but it was not.
Because I was just, when I was looking at my own data with participation, what I noticed was that I didn't have a lot of participation in programming, so I was just interested to see if you had broken down, if it was at 4 and 10, if it was building, if it
Yeah.
was like the upperclassmen that were bringing that number down, or if it was just across campus, if it was 4 and 10.
Yeah, we just looked by class ranking. I figured we can kind of talk about this, and then if people want it for their specific buildings, they can kind of look in their buildings, or I can help people break that down by building if they're not Qualtrics savvy to do that. I just didn't think we needed to talk about each building specifically during this.
Well, that brings about too that whole connected, because you're thinking connected of attending programs. To them, connected might be I know my neighbors. I don't attend anything my RA does because I don't care, but I feel connected to the people that
Yes.
live by me. So
Yeah.
that.
Or I could attend all the programs I want, but I
I'm
still
not
feel
connected.
alone.
Right. I
You
still
know, and
feel
I'm not
lonely or
connected.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and to Sal's point, we asked the question, like, I recognize people in my community. Cool, it's great that you recognize them, but do you know anything about them, or do you just see the same person every day because you use the bathroom? Does that really make you connected if you just happen to see that same person before your 8 a.m.? And so I think looking critically at this question moving forward is something we need to do. This is just an interesting finding about I have attended hall council. The 52% say never have they attended hall council, 15% rarely, 10 sometimes, 8 most of the time, and 13.7 always. And so again, I think this would be interesting at a building by building level, but something that I just brought up in terms of looking critically at what is the purpose of hall council. This isn't meant to be Cody or anything like that. I'm not trying to call RHA out because that's not how I want this to come off, but I think having a critical conversation around this table about what is the purpose of this, why do we see value added in people going to this, we'll talk about this afternoon, but I think sometimes getting the message out on some of the things that we're doing is something that we need to look at more as a department. And so when more than half of our students don't see value in attending hall council, it starts to raise the question of how can we add that value, has it lost some of that value added and they're getting it someplace else, or what is really driving that? I know not all 52% of these students are going to S2Is on Monday nights. Yes, I'm sure some of them are, but there's other reasons they're not coming. And I think looking at that could really help some of this getting connected to the building, to the community, if we can figure out this 52%.
This isn't surprising because to me this is like a 20-80 ratio principle, like that our top of our students are 20% who are really engaged, participate. It's the other 80% that we can't seem to get.
I agree with that.
I mean, to me, like if you did this 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I bet this number should probably still be the same.
Well, and attended and being engaged in hall council are different things. Again,
Right.
finding value is the word that you sent. Just because they're attending doesn't mean they find value.
No, for sure, but
So we're using terminology that I don't know that we can take from that data.
One
But
thing-
you
This is
can
just
say
like
that
this is
if
what
you
mean.
continually go, there's got to be a reason that you're going. You know, you got to be a reason, whether it's value or some kind of
Right.
intrinsic feeling you get, or, you know, whatever it means for you.
Well, and people aren't, and I think looking at the flip side, the people who aren't going clearly aren't finding value in it. And so,
Yeah.
I look at that, I have attended, like you haven't even gone to one. Clearly you don't find whatever word you want to use in being there. And so how do we give people that reason to be there?
Well, those are the same students too that aren't going to anything, so that's gonna be your same population,
But even more
not
so.
going to any- Right.
All right.